All right, this is Psalm 85, and I'm picking up in verse 4. Restore us, O God of our salvation, and cause your anger toward us to cease. Will you be angry with us forever? Will you prolong your anger to all generations? Will you not revive us again, that your people may rejoice in you? Show us your mercy, Lord, and grant us your salvation. I will hear what God the Lord will speak, for he will speak peace to his people and his saints. But let them not turn back to folly. Surely his salvation is near to those who fear him. The glory may dwell in the land. May mercy and truth have met together, righteousness and peace have kissed. Truth shall spring out of the earth, and righteousness shall look down from heaven. Father, we do ask that you would revive us again, that you would cause us to focus on you and not on our circumstances and not on the world and the issues in the world, but that we would trust in you and knowing that you are involved, you are sovereign over all, and that you love us. And it's in Jesus' mighty name we ask these things. Amen. All right, well, so last time, and I guess it's been a couple of weeks now, we were really starting to get into Samson. And we read a large part of chapter 14, though we didn't finish it, so we'll pick up there again. And if you remember, Samson took a trip down to Timnah, which is a Philistine village, and he decided there that he wanted to marry this Philistine woman that he met, remember? And Samson then returned home and demanded that his father and his mother get her for his wife. And we discussed that, just as a reminder, that in both Exodus and Deuteronomy, Moses, he captured that God had warned them, the Israelites, not to marry outside of the faith, because idol worshippers and idol worshiping spouses would lead them, the Israelites, away from God, would lead them into idolatry, which, as we talked about, is exactly what happened in their history. And then we talked about the fact that Samson chose to ignore God's commands, despite this great start that he had. And remember, he did have a fantastic start, and he was called to do this, but he decided he wanted to do things his way, and we discussed about how that would be a pattern in Samson's life, and that it would just be one of the things that we would notice about him. And we also talked about how Samson, even early on in his story, began to frequently flirt with sin, and he had very little, or seemed to have very little regard for his Nazirite vow. Because you remember he went, remember, and it was around dead things, and he took the honey out of the dead things and stuff like that.
No.
We also talked about how Samson was disrespectful. And do you remember who he was disrespectful to?
To his parents?
Mm-hmm.
His parents and to God.
To God. To his faith in general. How about to his vow? He was completely disrespectful to the vow of a Nazirite.
But I have a question about that. I thought last time we talked about this, he was different. That he was before he was even born. Before he was created, God was going to make him. So it's not like he had the. Did he have the choice?
Of course he did. Of course he did.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And he was certainly disrespectful to the Israelites, and we'll see more of that. These were people he was supposed to lead, and of course he really didn't do that. And as he started, to God, then of course he goes through with arranging this wedding, and remember at the wedding feast, Samson challenged the Philistines to answer his riddle. And it was a riddle that he knew the answer to. It wasn't really a real riddle. Okay, it was a secret that he hadn't told anybody about. And so
Why is he doing it in the first place? I don't understand that.
What's that?
Why is he asking them a riddle in the first place?
He's mocking them, and he's using a so-called riddle or a game that's stacked. Okay. Nobody knows the answer but him. And he's tricked them into it, and what's he going to get out of it? He's going to get a lot of wealth. He's going to get 30 sets of clothes, right? And so then remember they go behind his back and try to get his wife involved in it, and they threaten the wife, and the wife doesn't. They accuse her of being siding with her husband, the Jews, instead of with her own people, the Philistines, and then they threaten her, and they said, "Hey, we'll come take it out against you and your father," and so she gives in, and so what we saw was this game really revealed a huge degree of distrust and actually even treachery that was happening between Samson, his wife, and the Philistines. It is really kind of an ugly situation, right? And we ended by discussing the fact that God would use Samson, despite his sinful ways, for his own purposes. And that this was a pattern in the story of Samson. And one of the things that would come out of it is this reminder that God is indeed sovereign over all, okay? That he can choose to use you even if you choose to sin, okay? And of course we saw that in the story of Joseph when we studied in Genesis. Now we're going to pick up in chapter 14, verse 17, and we'll see how far into 15 we get, but we should start to see these same patterns developing and continuing, and of course it gets even worse. Okay, now we left off before the end of the wedding. We're going to pick up in verse 17 of chapter 14. So Maya, would you read 17 through 20 in chapter 14 of Judges, please?
Hang on, let's see, 16. Okay, she cried the whole 7 days of the feast. So on the seventh day, he finally told her, because she continued to press him. She in turn explained the riddle to her people. Before sunset on the seventh day, the men of the town said to him, "What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion?" Samson said to them, "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle." Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. He went down to Ashkelon, struck down 30 of the men, stripped them of their belongings, and gave their clothes to those who had explained the riddle. You want to keep going? I couldn't remember what you said.
Through the chapter.
Okay. Burning with anger, he went up to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to the friend who had attended him at his wedding.
So let's finish this out. Notice in verse 17, that she wept, before him for 7 days. She's persistent. She's not going to give up on Samson. She's, telling him all the time, every day, about how he doesn't trust her and he doesn't really love her and all of that kind of stuff. And notice it says she pressed him hard. And there's a proverb, and I forgot which one it is, that talks about how rain dripping off a roof is nothing compared to a wife that continues to do these kinds of things. And I think we see that here. And ultimately he gives her the answer that she wants. Now, this also, we mentioned, is a pattern that we're going to see in his life. Okay, in all fairness to the wife, and I kind of mean this in the nicest way. The Philistines are not believers in God. Obviously they are anything but that. They're idol worshipers. And so for us, as we look back and we read about this, for us to expect for those who don't know God, like Samson's wife or the Philistines in general, to honor God's way is something silly. I mean, we really can't expect that. And in First Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14, we read, "But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned." So without the Spirit of God moving in her, how can she know that or realize that what she's doing is wrong? But if you think about it, what she's doing is showing us there is no relationship between her and Samson. There is no basis of a marriage, and there's no workings of God in their marriage. I mean, do you really think she's fond or in love with Samson?
No.
I don't see it. Okay. You think Samson actually trusts her?
No.
No.
He was lustful for her.
He what?
He was lustful for her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty much all it was. He doesn't pay any more attention to her than that. And we're going to see that yet again, actually. But there's all kinds of issues here, and of course they don't really, the Philistines don't fully trust her because they don't know exactly what's going on. But there's just a whole bunch of problems that they have to deal with. Okay.
Can I make a comment? I mean,
Yeah.
Basically Samson is to blame for all of this. I mean, number one, he wanted that Philistine wife. Number two, he brought up the riddle when he didn't have to.
He brought up the riddle when he didn't have to.
So
there's a degree of arrogance and pride here. He's marrying outside of the people. His parents even reminded him of it. He's kind of figures, hey, look, I can have it my way. Now, notice that at no point here does Samson go to God in prayer or to ask for help in any of this. And he's done something particularly stupid here, and yet he never talks to God about it. Ever done anything so dumb because you didn't talk to God about it first?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And sometimes I purposely didn't talk to God because I knew what I was doing was wrong in the first place.
So that's a great point. I don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us that, but that could be Samson's point. Maybe he did understand that this is wrong. Maybe he did understand his parents, and he purposely doesn't go to God for that. I don't know. Okay, but the treachery here is really, really thick. Okay, and each group is trying to deceive the other group. Samson is trying to deceive his wife to some degree, keep her out of it, and as well as the Philistines. This is, like I said, this is not a riddle. This is not a fair game. It's a very small fact that only he knows that happened in his life. He hasn't told anybody. This is not a riddle that they could figure out. He's not playing a fair game here. And they're not going to lose, okay? And the wife doesn't want the Philistine, and so look at all of the things that are going on here. And I think it speaks to the moral level of all of the, as well as the spiritual level of all of these people involved. Okay. Now it reminded me of something. Maybe you've heard this before, and it gets vocalized in different ways. But when you've got a situation going on with a bunch of people and stuff like that, and you can't determine the followers of God from the non-followers, there's a problem. I can't look at this and figure out, well, just by what they're saying and what they're doing, who would be the followers? You would think Samson, a follower of God, a Nazarite, who's to judge his people, would what? Follow in God's ways. And there's no way to distinguish. This is what Jesus talked about when he said, be in the world, but not of the world. You know, Christians, followers of God, should appear different to everybody. Well, so on on verse 18, on the last day, the very last minute, okay, and I think they did that on purpose, okay, right before sundown, the last day of the wedding, which was the deadline that Samson had to get him for the riddle, they say to him, hey, what is sweeter than honey and what is stronger than a lion? And he said to them, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle. Now, here, the word for plow means to plow or to cut in. It can also mean to devise. Samson is using an expression here to accuse them of plotting together with his future wife against him, to cheat him. He's claiming that they've cheated him. Now, of course, he was trying to cheat them, like I said. Okay, and of course, it's also really easy to look at these words and say, he's referring to his wife as a heifer. Again, how much respect do you think he really has for her? And so, what is Samson's response to this? I mean, how happy is he about this?
He's very angry.
Yeah, he's really angry, isn't he? And so, in verse 19, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, and he went down to Ashkelon, and he kills 30 of them, and took their spoil, and gave the changes of clothes to those who had told the riddle. And his anger burned, and he went up to his father's home. Now, I think it's only fair to point out, well, Samson did pay the debt. Okay, he could have just said, forget it. You've cheated, forget it. But he did pay it, okay? But he does it in a way that, quite honestly, at first, is probably surprising, okay? He goes down and he kills 30, and they're probably very wealthy Philistines in Ashkelon. Now, Ashkelon, Philistines had a unique situation in that they had 5 king cities, capital cities, okay? And they had kings over each of them, and they kind of worked together, and then there was a king of the kings. So this is one of the capital cities of the Philistines, so it's probably pretty wealthy. Now, spoils, just by definition, is something that you take off of the dead during a battle, okay?
He's touching the dead again.
He's touching the dead again. He's killing people, okay? I know this is a little maybe sick, but I've wondered, in the midst of this sick situation that's going on, you think there's blood on these clothes?
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is what he's giving them, okay? And I think it kind of represents the whole situation. Now,
well, don't you think the Philistines would question, why is there blood on the clothes? Who did you kill? Or they don't care?
Are you going to question a guy like that?
Maybe not.
Yeah, probably not. I'm going to clean them up and probably sell them, or if they're nice, use them. I don't know. And I'm sure they hear about the 30 guys in Ashkelon who get killed, so they probably understand. They probably figured it out. Now, in verse 19, it says, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily. Okay, and that means to rush, to come upon mightily, suddenly, powerfully, rapidly. Okay. By the way, this is the exact same word that was used when we read about how Samson tore apart the lion. It gives you kind of an idea in terms of what Samson did to these 30 Philistines. I don't think this is a case of he could be hit behind a rock and popped them on the head and was kind to them, took their clothes, and then left them like that. Okay? I think he tore them apart. Okay?
Why would God come upon him mightily so that he could do that?
Well, we're So God doesn't come upon him mightily so he can do that. He came upon him mightily, and Samson chose to do that. God didn't make him.
Strength, and then
Yeah.
it was his choice to go and be evil with it.
Remember in verse 4 of this chapter, we read it last time, we read that his father and mother did not know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines. At that time, the Philistines ruled over the Israelites. Now, God had wanted to start to judge the Philistines, okay? And he was going to use Samson to do it. God wasn't going to do it this way. God came upon him mightily, knowing Samson's anger. Samson's anger, which is not a godly thing, it's a sinful thing, just like murdering is sin. Okay, he went off and did a sinful thing. God just gave him the opportunity to do it. God gives us all kinds of abilities, and we can use them for God's will, God's way, or we can use them for our purposes. Ever use something that God has gifted to you against other people for things that weren't maybe God's way?
Probably.
Yeah. How about just trying to trick people, or being mean with them with your words, or any number of different things. See, God gives you intelligence and the power of speech and thought, and then maybe you get mad and use it to try to get even with somebody else. God didn't do that, but he gave you the ability. And it's the same thing here. Okay? Now, God used Samson's disobedience for his purposes, the purposes of beginning to judge the Philistines. Now, based on what we know about Samson, what we've read already, I'm going to ask a rhetorical question, which is, I bet you're not surprised to find out Samson has an anger issue. Right? I mean, think about it. Think about the way he spoke to his parents. Think about the way he insists on having his ways. Do you think a man like that was excited when he lost this riddle? He was sure he was going to get a lot of wealthy clothes. What do you think he was going to do with them? He's going to dress up looking better than everybody else. And now they beat him at his own game. How's he going to react to that?
He's really pissed.
He's really ticked. Okay? So we think about it this way. We recognize it's not surprising that his response is to go down to kill 30 of their own people and give the clothes to them. That's how he's going to pay. I mean, obviously, he can't do it on his own. He's got no money. So we see this man, okay, being revealed to us like this. And notice, that it ends in his anger burns and he goes up to his father's house. In verse 20, but Samson's wife was given to his companion who had been his friend. Now, Samson's wife is given to one of the companions. Remember earlier that they brought 30 companions because he didn't really have any friends. And so that's who it is that they're giving it to. Okay?
So when they say his father, he means his father-in-law, correct?
No. He went up to his father's house, his parents' house.
So
He
how
left.
did his father give away the woman? It's not his to get.
The father-in-law does.
Oh, okay.
Okay? The father-in-law he's getting ready to have a wedding, and there's no groom. Everything's ready for a wedding, and so he gives the woman, his daughter, to one of the guys who was there because Samson goes away angry. And so and I should point out, many translations, I think it's the NIV, and although it doesn't say this really in the Hebrew, but many believe that it was actually the one who was going to be the best man at the wedding.
That's what my Bible says.
Yeah. And it's not really clear whether that's true or not, but you get the point, right? And Samson doesn't know this. He goes away angry, then the father gives his daughter to somebody else. Okay? And so the question that I see here that I think is relevant for all of us, has your anger ever cost you anything?
Mm-hmm.
That's what
Yes.
that's what Samson's doing here. He gets angry, okay, and it's costing him something. Okay? Samson is a man who's portrayed as one who's governed by passion and desire and emotion rather than by God's word and God's commands. Now in Proverbs 15:33 we read, "The fear of the Lord is instruction, and wisdom and humility comes before honor." In Isaiah 11, verse 2, we read, "And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel, of might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord." Look at that contrast. The second quote from Isaiah is well regarded as a messianic quote about Jesus. And Samson fits the proverb perfectly. Samson has displayed neither a fear of God nor humility. Although he starts out great, look at where he is. And the story of Samson is a warning to all of us. Okay. Well, let's pick up in chapter 15. Let's see, Marie, will you read verses 1 through 6, please?
Sure. And I don't need the light on. After a while, in the time of wheat harvest, it happened that Samson visited his wife with a young goat. And he said, "Let me go into my wife into her room." But her father would not permit him to go in. Her father said, "I really thought that you thoroughly hated her, therefore I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister better than she? Please take her instead." And Samson said to them, "This time I shall be blameless regarding the Philistines if I harm them." Then Samson went and caught 300 foxes, and he took torches, turned the foxes tail to tail, and put a torch between each pair of tails. When he had set the torches on fire, he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines, and burned up both the shocks and the standing grain, as well as the vineyards and olive groves. Then the Philistines said, "Who has done this?" And they answered, "Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companion." So the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire.
Okay. All right.
Jeez.
So in chapter 15, we're going to see that God is going to use Samson's anger again for his purposes. God's not going to make Samson be angry, but God raised him up to be a judge. And Samson has a choice. He can adhere to his Nazirite vows, he can follow God, and he can be a leader of Israel, or he can choose to do it his own way. But either way, God is sovereign over all, and he's going to use Samson for his purposes. And so what we see in chapter 15 is two more occasions where God, knowing that Samson's anger is going to get the better of him, is going to allow that to work for his purposes. Okay? And in verse 1, we read, "But after a while, in the time of the wheat harvest, Samson visited his wife with a young goat," and says, "Hey, I'm going to go into her in her room," but the father doesn't allow her. Okay? So Samson has finally gotten over his anger. Obviously, it took a while. It wasn't a day, wasn't two. I'm not quite sure if this is the first wheat harvest in the spring, if this is the final one at the end of the growing season. I don't really know when the wedding took place, but I get the sense that it's been a while. You notice it says after a while. Okay, and the young goat is likely a peace offering. Okay, and in my notes on the side, I wrote, hey, after all, the wedding party didn't exactly go real well. And it was Samson's fault. Excuse me. But Samson's father-in-law won't let him see her. Now this is where Samson finds out that his wife was given to another man. Now, given what we know about Samson, how well do you think he's going to take that? Right?
He's going to be enraged.
Oh yeah, I got to believe he is truly torqued off. And notice what the father said. I really thought you hated her intensely. Well, I kind of understand that. Okay, so I gave her to your companion. Oh, now we find out that three-way treachery is really four-way treachery. The father's in it too, because he wants to, through the marriage now, he gives her to somebody else. He doesn't have to pay for her. He's probably getting some kind of, wedding gift, or she is, or whatever. I mean, this works out for his benefit. And of course, now his daughter's going to be married to one of their own people, not a Jew. This, you can see how this is all working. Each one has their own thing going here, right? Now, this is not appropriate under Jewish tradition, okay, by any way. Remember, we've talked about betrothal, but it's not Jewish tradition, and yet they seem to have the same kind of process, that they're betrothed for a while, and then after the party, after the wedding, then they consummate the marriage. But Samson and the wife never consummated the marriage, okay? And like I say, getting your daughter married is a huge deal, okay? Again, what we see is a non-believer acting in his own best interest. He has no moral obligation. He's not following God. He's just doing what seems best for him and for his daughter, okay? He has no concerns whatsoever for the promises that he made to Samson, okay? Now, he says he gave him to one of his companions, okay? And indeed, this is the same word that's used in chapter 14 twice when we read about the companions that they brought in from the Philistines to be a part of the wedding for Samson, okay? Now, it is interesting, if you stop to think about it, that the father won't let Samson in to see her. She's still living with the father. Now that brings up one of two options. It is conceivable that she's only betrothed to the companion and the wedding hasn't been completed and they haven't consummated it. In which case, couldn't the father say, hey, wait a minute, Samson's back. I had originally notice that he was more than happy to break the promise to Samson, but he doesn't want to break the promise to this other Philistine. Or they've consummated the marriage, they've completed it, but it isn't much of a marriage. She's living with her dad. We don't really know, okay? But you can see where I'm going with this. Something isn't right here, okay? And so, it's interesting to see what the status is that's going on, and it helps us to better appreciate everybody's position and where they're coming from, and you can understand maybe a little better why Samson would be really enraged about this if in fact the marriage hasn't been consummated yet. Well, break your promise to her just like you did to me. I'm back. And the father doesn't seem to want to do that. Okay. What does the father do instead?
Offers the younger sister.
Hey, take the younger one, right? Make my life simple. Take the other, and then I get both of them married off. Okay. Now, if you happen to remember this, this is the basis of the old Samson movie from the 50s with Victor Mature and Hedy Lamarr. Okay, where they invented the idea that the younger sister is Delilah. Okay. Now, there's no truth to that. So if you happen to be thinking about that, that's not in the Bible. They just take this younger sister thing and they run with it. They make it all up because Samson doesn't want to have anything to do with the younger sister, okay? The younger sister is not Delilah, okay? Verse 3, Samson then said to them, This time I shall be blameless in regard to the Philistines when I do them harm. I find that a very interesting statement. Okay? Because when I see this, I see two things in it, at least. Samson is clearly stating, hey, I've got the right to revenge. I'm not going to be guilty about this. I'm going to be blameless. Okay, I've got the right to do to them whatever I want. Why?
But that's not true.
Why? What did they do? Why isn't he ticked at the father? Isn't that interesting? Okay, we'll come back to that. He says he's got the right to revenge, to take it out for having the wife given to another man. Okay, and so it's a very interesting statement, and it's easy to see if we think about it why the Philistines would think that Samson was at fault for the wedding party fiasco. After all, he kills the 30 Philistines, he brings back their clothes, throws them at him, and then storms off. But when I see him say, "This time I shall be blameless," this time, does Samson start to feel some remorse? Does he start to recognize maybe he behaved poorly that first time? Is it possible that the Israelites had heard what had happened and even they started to condemn him? Well, I don't know. That's all just speculation, but you can see that in his words there's hints of stuff that there's something going on here, okay? But regardless, when he says, "This time I shall be blameless," okay, don't miss the fact that Samson's intent is to do the Philistines harm. I get the impression that last time his anger got the better of him. He just went off in anger and did this. This time, it's premeditated. And he's justifying his actions by his own view of justice. Notice that, right? This is Samson's view of justice. Well, I've got the right to do this. Does he really have the right to do it?
No.
His beef is with the father. He's not doing anything to the father. He's going after the Philistines. Okay? Notice also that we don't see anything in these passages about God leading him to do this. We don't see Samson, once again, we don't see Samson seeking guidance or advice or direction from God. Samson simply feels that he's been cheated and he has the right to take matters into his own hands. Sound like people today? Now, I'm going to tell you right now as we go through this, because this is important to see, okay, God has nothing to do with what Samson actually chooses to do. Although notice God doesn't stop him either. God is allowing Samson free choice, and he's allowing Samson's anger and sin, and it is going to be a sin, to work for his purposes. But that doesn't mean that God would choose for Samson to act this way. And this is something we're going to talk about a lot as we work through Samson, the story of Samson. Okay? Verse 4, Samson went and caught 300 foxes and took torches and turned the foxes tail to tail and put one torch in the middle of each of them. I would love to have seen this. I mean,
why did he just take a torch and torch it himself? Now he's killed these poor innocent foxes.
I have no. By the way, the word here in the Hebrew for foxes is also the word used for jackal. Nobody, while it's always translated as foxes, nobody really knows whether they're foxes or jackals. Okay, and I have no idea how he did this. And did he put them in crates or cages while he ties them all up, or does he do it one at a time? I have no idea how he did this. And quite frankly, like I say, I would have loved to have seen this, okay, or understand how he did it. Okay.
I just feel bad for them because they're going to burn up too.
Well, maybe, I don't know. But I can tell you this. Once you get them in that condition and then you let them go, it is not hard to imagine the incredible amounts of havoc that they would create in an agrarian society, right?
Right. No, I have a picture of it too. They're running like
nuts, right? And they got to be scared to death, and they're going everywhere. Okay. Now my guess is, and I don't know this. This is just a guess, that this is the fall harvest where things are dried up. It's the end of the year, and they're going to catch on fire more easily. Okay. Also notice something, and I didn't think about this. I actually read this somewhere. That the Bible doesn't say that Samson did this in just one day, nor does it say he didn't have some help. He could have solicited some help. Now, I suspect he did not, okay, because he's always going to do things on his own. He never goes to the Israelites for help. We'll see that as we go. But it is conceivable that he did this over a period of time, okay? Now, quite honestly, when you step back and you look at it, okay, besides the kind of the how did he do this kind of reaction that we probably all have when we really think about it, this is truly, really a juvenile delinquency kind of an act. Okay, I mean when you think about it, okay, and while it is that kind of juvenile act. Okay, we're going to see it has a huge impact. Okay, it's far more than that. It is revenge, just flat out. That's what it is. And notice what's happening here. We start to see it. Revenge simply leads to more revenge. There's no end to that cycle. It never ever ends. Human nature is, you did it to me, I'm going to do it to you. Well, what does the other guy think? You did it to me, I'm going to do it back to you. And so we're going to see this cycle of revenge in this chapter, okay, and going on, okay, it's going to continue. There is no end to this. Now in Romans chapter 12, Paul wrote, "Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, saith the Lord. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good." That's in verses 19 and 21. Now I want to just for a second look at that first verse, 19. "Dearly beloved, avenge not yourself, but rather give place unto wrath." This is one of those things, the way it's worded and the way we speak and stuff like that, nowadays we probably wouldn't stop and pay a lot of attention to it. We'd look at that and go, that's kind of a weird way to say it, and we'd move on. But think about what it really says, okay? But rather give place unto wrath. Don't avenge yourself. See, when we take action to avenge ourselves, we don't give God the opportunity to pour out his wrath. God says, hey, you want to take matters in your own hand? That's fine. Then I'll do nothing. In life, it is truly important to give God room, space, and time to act. When we react immediately to things, particularly in anger, or we deny God the right to do the right thing. And this is, we see this all through Samson's life. And if we're honest, quite frankly, we see it in ours. We need to give God the time to do his thing. See, God doesn't take revenge as a man. God instead provides righteous judgment and justice, but he has to do it in his time. And we race off and take things into our own hands, just as Samson's about to do. we don't give God the opportunity to do what he would do. Zephaniah wrote in chapter 3, verse 5, the Lord within her, that's a reference to Jerusalem. So the Lord within Jerusalem is righteous. He does no wrong. Morning by morning, he dispenses his justice, and every new day he does not fail. Yet the unrighteous know no shame. The unrighteous know no shame. They just keep going on and doing their own thing. You think Samson here would fall into the category of righteous or unrighteous?
Unrighteous.
Yeah. He's not giving God the time. Now, given the fact that he's a judge of Israel, I would argue that had he not allowed his anger to take place, had he not, and he'd allowed God to lead him, God would have used him, God would have avenged him, God would have taken it out. After all, he's raising Samson up to take justice out on the Philistines, but he would have done it his way. Instead, God says, okay, go do it yourself. That's what you want. We read in Deuteronomy, Moses wrote, their wine is the poison of dragons and cruel venom of asps. Is not this laid up in store for me and sealed up among my treasures? To me belongeth vengeance and recompense. Their foot shall slide in due time. For the day of their calamity is at hand, and the things that shall come upon them make them make haste. God will bring vengeance when it's time, and it'll be swift, okay, and it'll be appropriate. But like I say, when we get in there and try to do it ourselves, we interfere with God. Just to clarify and make sure we understand what we're talking about here, technically, to avenge someone is to take an action in response of a wrong that has been done to them out of a desire for justice, where revenge is motivated by anger or malice. God's vengeance is motivated by his sense for justice and his desire for it. Samson here is motivated by anger, by malice, and he just wants to get even. Because as we said, these Philistines didn't do anything to him. It was the father. But there's no indication Samson ever even addresses or talks to the father. Samson is a believer in God, but he's not walking with God. You know anybody like that? Verse 5. And when he had set fire to the torches, he released the foxes into the standing grain of the Philistines, thus burning up both the shocks, the standing grain, along with the vineyards and the groves. Now, I liked your translation of it a little bit better, Marie. But essentially, think about what he's doing here. By the way, the shocks, that's stacked up grain. In other words, this is grain that's already been harvested, that's stacked up. Perhaps it's either just the grain separated by itself, ready to be utilized, okay, and ground and stuff like that, or it's still on the shock. I'm not quite sure on the stalk, but it's already harvested. It's piled up. So they burn that up. They burn up the standing grain. That's the grain that's still in the fields that hasn't been harvested yet. Okay. They burn up the karam, which is the vineyards. They burned up the zayat, which is Hebrew to mean either olive tree, or olive groves. There's a huge amount of damage here that these foxes are doing. Okay. Now, while the Bible doesn't specify 300 foxes, I'm guessing we are talking more than just a couple of fields. I think he's releasing them in different fields. I think he's probably doing it at different times, maybe over a period of 2 or 3 days. He catches them all, ties them all up. He takes them, 4 or 5 pairs to this one field, lets them go. 4 or 5 pairs to this field, lets them go. I'm guessing it was something like that. And there's a huge amount of damage that's done financially and also from just a food point of view to the Philistines. Okay. Now notice in verse 6, then the Philistines said, who did this? And they said, and I'm assuming they being the Israelites or other people around there, but anyhow, they said, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timonite. Was it a secret? No. Everybody knew Samson did it. Everybody knew.
But they say son-in-law, but he didn't marry that girl.
Oh,
Did he marry the sister?
What does that mean?
Did Samson not tell them he didn't get married?
Nope, they know. What does it mean? Even the Philistines recognized that what the father did was wrong. He had made a commitment to Samson's and Samson's parents to give the daughter to Samson, and giving it to another even by the Philistine standards, what he did was wrong, because they recognize him as Samson's father-in-law. They recognized that they were committed to each other, okay? And the father had no right to give the daughter to another man. Like I say, think of the treachery, think of the morality here that's going on, okay? So the Philistines recognize that this is wrong, and they say it's because he took his wife, and gave her to his companion. So the Philistines come up and burned her and the father with fire. Who are they angry at? Samson. Samson released the foxes. Samson destroyed their crops. And what do? They kill, they burn down, I guess, the father's house with the daughters in it. You think that sounds like justice? Look at what we're seeing about all of these people. The Philistines essentially extract revenge on Samson by burning down the house of this woman. Samson, therefore, attacked the Philistines even though he was angry with the father. The Philistines attacked the father even though they're angry with Samson. Each is taking out their anger in completely inappropriate ways, okay, against people who were just easy to attack. Neither really wanted to deal with the issue or try to resolve it, did they? I mean, look at what Samson's doing. Is he standing up addressing? No, he's kind of hiding behind stuff and damaging their property. He's a coward. Look at what they're doing. Are they going after Samson? Heck no, they don't want to mess with Samson. We're going to see that again. They don't want to have anything to do with him. So they go after the easy target. They burn the father and the wife down. Neither really wanted to deal with the real issue and resolve it. This is human nature, okay? And notice again, revenge just escalates with every cycle. Now, don't make any mistake about this. God is not condoning, nor is he pleased with the violence in these cycles of revenge or what any of these people are doing. And his word makes that very clear in multiple places. Yet he's allowing the sinful nature of man to take it, run its course, and in that process, in a sense, justice is being done. He said he's going to use Samson to take out vengeance on the Philistines for how they're treating the Israelites. They just lost a bunch of property. What the guy did was wrong, and he paid for it in a sense. Now, it may have been inappropriate, it may have been too high, and he never got a trial, but in a sense, God is allowing their sinful nature done the wrong way. God's not happy with it, but he's letting it happen. This is still God's way today. Okay? And it's very hard for us to recognize it. We can see it here in these passages when we really stop and think about it. Okay? But we have to really stop and think about it because it's not our nature to think about things this way. But you got to look at it from God's view. Okay? Now in verse 7, Samson said to them, "Since you act like this, I will surely take revenge on you, but after that, I will quit." Do you believe that?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I mean, you know the story, but I mean, there's no reason to believe he's going to actually stop. Because once he gets revenge again, what do you think is going to happen?
They'll pay him back.
It's another cycle. Okay? It's never going to stop. Okay? And not only that, this is not consistent with Samson's behavior. Okay? Of course he's not going to stop. Okay? You know what? When I read this a few weeks ago, preparing for tonight or today, this morning, as I read through this, something struck me. Samson states this just like an addict. I'll do it one more time, then I'll stop. Samson is addicted to revenge. He's addicted to his sense, his perception of justice. He's addicted to, I win. It's my way. I get to be the king, little k. Now this is really interesting because it's been speculated by people, and I have to tell you, it took a little bit of time, but after a little bit of thinking about it, I'm convinced this is true. It's been speculated that had Samson extracted God's judgment on the Philistines in accordance with God's leading, that Samson would have been blessed mightily by God. Instead, there's great personal cost here for Samson. Now, regardless of what we think about it, okay, he wanted to marry that woman. Obviously, that never happened. Had he done and led Israel and allowed God to lead him in administering God's vengeance and justice, okay, I don't know that the wife would have died. Maybe things would have worked out great. Okay? But that's the point. When we allow God to lead us, God blesses us. Instead, Samson goes off and does it his own way, turns his back on God, uses the gifts God has given him to do things the wrong way, to be disobedient, to do things sinfully, and there's great personal cost for Samson. Now, think for a minute about Israel's history. Under the kingdom age, the nation breaks up because of greed, this, that, and the next thing. Okay, the northern 10 tribes eventually get conquered by Assyria, a pretty nasty people. Remember, we talked about them when we talked about Jonah and the Ninevites. Nineveh was the capital of Assyria. And then ultimately the Babylonians conquer them and then come down and conquer the last two tribes, primarily Judah, and they take Jerusalem, and it's a really, really ugly thing. And we read all throughout how the Jews were shocked that God would allow somebody this evil to come and do this. Okay? God allowed an evil group of people to administer his vengeance even though they were evil. Now later he held the Assyrians accountable for the evil way that they did it, and later he held the Babylonians accountable for the evil way that they extracted vengeance. God didn't condone the way they did it or the extent of violence and everything else, but he allowed them, he used them to extract his vengeance and his justice. Okay, it's the exact same thing here, and Samson's going to pay a price for it. Now, we're going to come back to this thought repeatedly through this story, okay? Verse 8, so Samson, he struck them ruthlessly with a great slaughter, and he went down and lived in the cleft of the rock of Etam. Now, we're not told any detail regarding this battle other than it was a great slaughter. And given what he's done before, I think it was probably a pretty great slaughter. Notice we're not told the details, and this is another one of those things that God tends to do. We don't need to know the details. What we need to know is the way God looked at it. It was a
Isn't
great.
there a time he gets people with the jawbone of a
No,
man?
that's coming up.
Oh, okay.
This is the great. This is just the great slaughter. Okay. By the way, the word here, slaughter, literally means a scourging or a chastisement, a beating. It can even mean pestilence. Um,
So he's wiping them out.
the King James and the New King James translate it literally as he smote them hip and thigh with a great slaughter. I mean, they're piled up. Okay, literally, I don't know if this was a village he went down to or what it was, but he extracts his vengeance in a great slaughter. Now notice what happens as soon as he's done with that. He went down and lived in a cleft in the rock of Etem.
He's hiding.
He's hiding. He runs away to sulk and to hide. Okay. Now the exact location of this cliff is uncertain. It's believed to be down south, down further south from where all this action is taking place in Timnah, Lehi, and Ashkelon, and all that kind of stuff. But nobody knows for sure. What we do know is that Hebrew for Etem means literally the lair of wild beasts. How appropriate. Isn't that exactly what he's acting like? An uncontrolled wild beast. No discipline, no sense of godliness, just emotion ravaging these people. Okay? Sounds like Samson extracts his revenge and then goes off to sulk or as we said, perhaps even hide. Did he really think this was going to be the end of it? So he physically goes away. He said, I'm going to strike him again, and then that'll be the end of it. And so he physically goes away. You really think that's emotionally where he is? You think he really just said, okay, I'm done now?
No, I think he's hiding because he knows it's going to come back again.
I think he's brooding. I think he's just sulking. I think he's getting madder and madder down there, quite frankly. Verse 9. Then the Philistines went up and camped in Judah and spread out in Lehi. Now, that actually is a little bit deceptive. We'll see why I say that in a second. Verse 10, the men of Judah said, why have you come up against us? Notice the against us. And they said, we have come up to bind Samson in order to do to him as he did to us. Okay, well, okay, so what we're getting into here is really the Philistines come up to extract and enact additional revenge. It seems to appear in the Hebrew that what they really do is they come up and they spread out with a bunch of men, a bunch of armed men, and they raid this town of Lehi. Okay, now it could be because they can't find Samson. That's one possibility. Okay, I think there's another thing going on here. Okay, and I want to point this out. What was Samson raised up to do, to be?
That's right.
Okay, and what else?
A judge.
Mm-hmm. And remember we talked about the judges to lead them and take care of them and all these kinds of things, right? By going off to sulk and not staying behind to be responsible, accountable, whatever, Samson actually increases the oppression on the Israelites from the Philistines. The Philistines come up to raid them and pillage them in Lehi. I'm guessing since he's burned all their food stocks and then he goes down and he slaughters them, they go up there and they start taking the food from the Israelites and who knows what else. Okay? Notice that there's never any indication that Samson ever once attempts to organize the Israelites to form an army or to lead them against the Philistines. Now, that's important because in many cases, like in Gideon, and remember there were a lot of similarities at the beginning of Samson's story with some of Gideon's story, with the angel of the Lord coming to him and stuff like that. That's what other judges did. They organized the Israelites into armies and they led those armies against their oppressors. Samson doesn't do that. Samson appears to prefer to win battles by himself. And by doing so, what happens? He gets all this fame. The attention gets focused on him. You know what else happens? There's nobody there to say, hey Samson, man, your emotions are getting the better of you. Wouldn't it be better if we did this? There's nobody else. He gets his way completely. He doesn't have to deal with people. He gets to do it his way. He gets all the fame. He gets all the glory. See, I think he's a scrawny little guy. Okay? I think that the Philistines come up and raid this town and everything else to motivate them to go get Samson. Okay? Verse 10, then the men of Judah said, why have you come up against us? And they said, we've come up to bind Samson in order to do to him as he did to us. But they know Samson's not there. See, they don't want to deal with Samson. They want the Israelites to deal with him. Okay. Now we'll stop there because of time. Okay. But we'll pick up there next time, and we'll start to see what happens next. But you can see what's going on here, and I think it's really safe to ask the question: does anybody see God leading anybody?
No.
No.
It's mustard. They're all gone.
Now think about it, okay? When Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt, who poured out the plagues?
God.
Was it Moses' anger? Did Moses choose these things? No. There's actually indications Moses really didn't was I mean he's supportive of God, he submits to God, but there's indications that Moses thought, hey, this is a terrible thing that all the firstborn are going to die, right? And God's the one who collapsed the Red Sea on the Egyptian army, not Moses. Moses was just a tool, and here we see Samson doing things his way based on his anger because he won't let God lead him. There's a lesson here for us, right? Do I insist on things my way, or do I make room for God to lead me, for things to be done God's way, for God to utilize the gifts that he's given me for his purposes in his way, or do I choose to do it my way and I leave no room for God? And who do you think is going to do it better? Whether it's making him known, whether it's being decent to people, or whether it's getting justice because I think I've been taken, advantage of. Who do you think is going to do that better, me or God? When we don't let God lead us, when we don't leave room for God to take care of things, we settle for second best or even worse. Isn't that what's happening in Moses' life? I mean, Moses and Samson's life? Look at the cost here. He's completely alienated from his people. He's off sulking, okay? His own people don't even care for him, okay? Everybody hates him. His wife, the woman he wanted, has been burned up. Do you think he's having a good time? Not right now. All right. Any other comments or thoughts or questions?
Again, it's really good, Eric. Thank you.
I'll tell you, not to get anybody too depressed, but I'll end with the same thought I expressed last time, which I will express yet again before we're done. The thing I don't like about the story of Samson is he looks too much like me. All right. Who wants to pray to close us out?
I can.
Okay.
Dear God, thank you for your word as always. Thank you for the message. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to learn from this so we can better understand how we should react as human beings, to let you be in charge and to not let us and our egos think I can do it better, because nobody can do it like you. We need time to step back and to think of you. Let the Holy Spirit come upon us when we are emotional and enraged and angry, or we feel, hurt by somebody, before we do something that is against what you would have us do. Thank you for your son, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.